Nask here. So it seems our dear friend, Atheism Plus and feminist advocate, Steve Shives, recently got a bit of a wild hair up his ass about the Pledge of Allegiance here in the United States. I guess somehow the pledge is annoying to him. Like a younger sibling who can't help but poke you in the cheek constantly in a long car ride while mom and dad are up front bickering about gas prices. And so, taking that wild ass hair to the next step, he decides to put out a video titled 5 Annoying Things About the Pledge of Allegiance. So I felt I could take some time out of my day to respond appropriately. But before we even get into his first reason, let's take a gander at what the video description is. Oh, looky here. Not much of anything in there of substance for the most part. But before he gets to his self-promotion links for Patreon and reminding you to subscribe to his channel, it is prefaced with this little tidbit here. Quote, legally, the U.S. government can't force anyone to say the Pledge of Allegiance. But they really, really want you to. So right off the bat, we need a little clarification. Yes, the government cannot force you or anyone else to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, as was established by the Supreme Court in the 1943 landmark case West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett, where it was stated, quote, the action of a state in making it compulsory for children in the public schools to salute the flag and pledge allegiance by extending the right arm, palm upward, and declaring, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, violates the First and 14th Amendments. It was also beautifully stated by Justice Robert Jackson in this case that, quote, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. If there are any circumstances which permit an exception, they do not now occur to us. For the most part, it's been upheld as constitutional that school districts may indeed have policies for the voluntary recitation of the pledge, such as on November 20th, 1992, the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit in Sherman v. Community Consolidated School District 21 held that a school district's policy for voluntary recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance, including the words, under God, was constitutional. Essentially, this means that a district or teachers may technically allow and promote the pledge, but cannot in any way punish or reprimand students who voluntarily choose to refrain from partaking, be it with silence, sitting, leaving the classroom, etc. Now that the long part is out of the way, the second part being, but they really, really want you to, is kind of a no-brainer. Of course the government would really want its citizens to regularly recite or perform a show of allegiance to their flag and by correlation the nation itself. The government and the nation cannot exist as it does without the pride, adoration, and loyalty of its citizenry, and so will instill as much of it all in the people as it can do so, even when they cannot directly force it upon you. That being the point, however, that the highest laws in our lands protect us from such overbearing government control. Well, that was a bit of a long-winded response to such a short video description, but we can finally move on and address the points that Steve makes about the pledge and how it irks him so.
School's been back in session for about a month now here in the good old USA, which means that students across the country are already sick of standing, facing the flag, and putting their hands over their hearts.
Of course they are, as anyone who has ever been to an American school knows. As explained earlier, however, they aren't required to do so. But let's be honest. It's not just the pledge they're tired of. It's the fact that they are even at school to begin with.
Here are 5 annoying things about the Pledge of Allegiance. Number 1, it's said way too often.
I do have to ask then, Steve, how often is often enough? That just seems a bit pointlessly subjective.
The ritual of saying the pledge every morning is introduced to us.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Wait right the fuck up. Steve Shives already pledged allegiance to the PC SJW gynocracy. Well, I'm already sure most of us are already aware what a social justice warrior is, thanks to those with a much broader voice and audience, such as Milo Yiannopoulos, Sargon of Akkad, Thunderfoot, and others. And we all know PC being political correctness or politically correct. But I think we need to address what this gynocracy is. Gynocracy, noun, a variant of gynecocracy. Okay, well then, gynecocracy, noun, political supremacy of women. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary website. Another website called thefreedictionary.com defines it as, quote, government by women, a society ruled by women. And then there is Wikipedia, which says, quote, government or rule by women or a society with such leadership. See also, there it is, matriarchy. Now, maybe it's just me, but here we have Steve Shives, a self-proclaimed feminist, pledging his allegiance to a gynocracy, it being, from what I can tell, a form of government ruled by women, and I presume only women, as there doesn't seem to be any kind of modifiers to the language to insist on equal representation with men, or anyone else for that matter. But Merriam-Webster itself even defines it as the, quote, political supremacy of women. We hear all the time from feminists about how feminism is an equality movement, an ideology professing and supporting the idea of the equality of men and women in society. But here we have a feminist, a male feminist, openly supporting the idea of political supremacy and rule by women. That doesn't sound like equality to me, I gotta be honest. I'm not saying all feminists subscribe to this idea, but it does bring up an interesting issue, that being, how prevalent is this idea and support in the feminist movement? I'd like to see some data on this at some point in the future, if possible. But anyways, we're getting sidetracked. Moving on.
So early that most of us grow up not even questioning it. I think I must have been in high school before it finally occurred to me how odd it was that we said the pledge every day.
Yeah, I'll admit, it is a bit odd doing it every single day. But again, as we've stated before, it's not like it's a requirement or anything. In and of itself, it's a show of respect for the nation and its symbol, that anyone and everyone is free to recite if they want to, or not. Either way, that's all it is.
Not on the first day of school, or on Veterans Day, or on the Friday before the long weekend of George Washington's birthday, but every single day at school begins with swearing a loyalty oath.
A loyalty oath? Well, in a certain respect, yes. But in another respect, it's not really an oath, so much as a simple, respectful way to show one's support and loyalty to the nation. It's cutely patriotic, and there is nothing inherently wrong with being patriotic. Personally, I don't care if someone doesn't salute the flag and recite the pledge to show their loyalty to the country. They're here, they're in our schools, our parks, our places of business, our government. I presume their loyalty to the country by default. Saluting and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance is just a way for anyone who chooses to do so to express that loyalty. The pledge isn't mandated by government after all, it's entirely voluntary.
To the American flag. I mean, when I stepped back and looked at it objectively, it struck me as kind of creepy. Don't you think?
Objectively? I think not. What you find creepy isn't an objective matter. It's a matter of personal taste and feelings. It's entirely subjective.
I mean, for one thing, number two, it reeks of insecurity.
Oh, here we go.
Was there a period in the 19th century when primary schoolers were just committing treason left and right?
If there were, you'd hear about it. That would have been some hot ticket shit right there to report on.
Because they never told us about that in school. Then again, why would they?
I don't know, maybe to use as propaganda against the citizenry about the horror and evil of not being always loyal and supportive to your country and your government? If you're going to go on about this whole thing assuming the Pledge of Allegiance is being forced on us as a subtle method of control, they wouldn't go out of their way to cover up mass dissent and disloyalty. They'd take it, spin it, and churn it out for their own benefit. That face at the end there, though, it basically screams conspiracy theory.
But even if the loyalty of the K through 12 population was a legitimate national security concern, saying the pledge on a daily basis is still pretty excessive.
Perhaps it is, but again, the claim is entirely subjective. I'm starting to think Steve is mixing up the idea of making a reasonable argument with just whining. Moving on.
Presidents, judges, military personnel, they all have to say their oaths just the one time.
They have to say it the one time because they are entering federal or state service in one form or another. If you're going to be a part of the government, you should damn well have to pledge an oath of loyalty. It should be made sure you are there to serve your country and the Constitution, and be able to be held accountable should you do otherwise.
What good is a loyalty oath if you can't trust people to keep it longer than a day? And if you can't trust people to keep it longer than a day, what good is making them say it the next day supposed to do?
And we come back to the issue of being required to make the pledge, as opposed to it being voluntary. Members of the government and military are required to make the pledge the one time. Other than that, nobody is mandated to recite it at all. Any other citizen has the right to choose to recite the pledge or not, and aside from that single mandated instance, any other government or military official has the right to choose as well at any other time.
And the Pledge of Allegiance isn't even that great of an oath.
I'd really like to hear what you'd consider to be a great oath then, Steve.
It started out pretty bad. And, number 3, it got worse after a rewrite.
Oh, Christ. This is going to be the under God thing. I just know it.
The current version of the pledge was adopted in 1954 when Congress amended the flag code to add the words under God to the pledge.
I knew it.
Now, anyone who wants to say the pledge and mean it not only has to swear their allegiance to the United States, but also affirm the existence of a God.
This is where the whole voluntary recitation thing comes into play. You don't have to recite it. If you take issue with the pledge or any part therein, you are free to choose not to say it. I just realized how often I'm going to have to be repeating myself in this video about personal choice and the lack of there being any kind of mandate that your average, everyday person has to follow. I do apologize for the inevitable repetitiveness. I'm so sorry.
And I think we all know which God they're talking about.
Yes, we do know which God they probably meant. But it's not as if they specifically altered the pledge to say, "One nation under the Christian God, and to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, praise be his name," or anything.
The concept of a loyalty oath that has to be repeated every day is silly enough, but the 1954 revision added a whole new problem to the pledge. Number 4, it's divisive and exclusionary.
He's going to say it oppresses or marginalizes anyone who isn't a Christian or believes in Jesus, isn't he?
Given the history and religious demographics of the United States, I think it's safe to assume that the God referred to in Under God is the Christian God.
Given the history and religious demographics of the United States, yes, it would seem so, since this nation has always been overwhelmingly more Christian, demographically speaking, far more so back in the day than any time the last 2 or 3 decades.
Now, you can stretch that concept a little bit and say the Judeo-Christian God, and that's a little bit more inclusive, and you can say, oh, it's the Abrahamic God, and make it roomier still. But no matter how much you blur the edges of the concept, you're always going to have people who just plain don't believe in any God. You're atheists, you're agnostics, you're irreligious folks of all types.
Or maybe there's those who believe in several gods, or who believe in goddesses instead, or who believe in spirits instead of gods, or who believe in Michael Jackson or David Bowie.
What good is it to have a loyalty oath to your nation if a significant portion of the people living in the nation can't say it?
They can say it. They cannot say it if they so choose. They can recite the original instead of the modified version. Even if they do recite it voluntarily, however, it doesn't mean they are being forced to accept the idea of a God. God is, regardless of original intention, a very broad title. Your God could be the Judeo-Christian God, Allah, Ra, Odin, Zeus, the moon, the flying spaghetti monster, or it could even be yourself if you so choose. It's a title that evokes a sense of power, control, and influence over us and our lives. It could be applied to anyone or anything of your choosing for any subjective, personal reasoning at all.
Not only that, But having under God in the pledge implies that in order to be a true blue patriotic American, you have to believe in the existence of a God.
It actually doesn't imply anything at all aside from belief in some form of higher power or force. Even if that higher power is Jesus, yourself, science, or the beautiful chaos of the universe.
And that's unjust. It's unfair.
Only if applied and presumed through such a narrow lens of interpretation. Like yours, apparently.
And number 5, it's un-American.
A pledge of loyalty and support to the United States of America is un-American. I do honestly think Steve has finally went off the deep end.
Actually, given our long-standing commitment to division and exclusion of people on the basis of racial, ethnic, sexual, religious, political, and economic factors,
You really do know how to so proudly sum up the social justice movement, don't you, Steve?
it's pretty damn American, now that I think about it. But it shouldn't be. If we're going to have a loyalty oath to the United States of America, it should at least be one that all Americans can say with sincerity and pride, should they choose to say it.
And there we come to the cusp of the issue here. Choose to say it. It's a choice. It's not mandated. It's not required. It's entirely voluntary. It's a choice, and if anyone chooses to say it, they can absolutely say it with all the pride and sincerity their little hearts can muster. Because it is up to the individual to decide not only if they say it, but why they say it.
Personally, I think we'd be better off working to make ourselves a nation that inspires the allegiance of its people in the first place.
If living in a liberal, Western, democratic, pluralistic society with all the freedoms and opportunities that everyone has available to them isn't a reason to inspire loyalty and admiration for one's nation, I honestly don't know what could.
We can cut 2 words and make the pledge more inclusive, or we can aim a little higher and work a little harder and make the pledge redundant. The hardest part is picking only 5. Catch you next time.
If reciting the pledge were a mandatory aspect of citizenship in this country, then perhaps I would have a reason or two to agree with you, Steve. But given the fact that it isn't a requirement, and that every American citizen has the choice of reciting the pledge or not, as well as how and why they recite it, if they choose to recite it at all, your reasoning falls pretty flat pretty fast, and pretty damn hard. If the pledge bothers you this much, Steve, you don't have to say it. In fact, go ahead and come up with your own pledge and recite that one instead. Because in a country like ours, you have the freedom to do so. And that's the key word, isn't it? Freedom.